make sure to give my dad a 5-star review.
Make sure to like and subscribe to his YouTube. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
You know, if there isn't something major to criticize, people are going to criticize something minor, and you can't live your life based on that, because if it's not this, it's going to be something else. The thing is that Trump is a great leader. He just is. Yes, he started off from a successful family, and yes, his father gave him $1 million, but you know, he's turned it into several billion. He rose to become president. We didn't get into new wars. He was able to turn a lot of things around. You know, the thing is, a lot of people don't like his personality, and he won't back down from the bullies.
Hey, welcome back, Faithful Politics listeners and watchers. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, I am your political host, Will Wright, and I'm joined by your faithful host, Pastor Josh Burtram. Welcome, Josh.
Thanks, Will. It's good to be here.
Hey, and today we have the privilege and honor to welcome Stephen Strang, who is the founder and CEO of Charisma Media. He was voted by Time Magazine as one of the 25 most influential evangelicals in America. He has interviewed 4 U.S. presidents and has been featured on a variety of different media outlets like Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, CBN, The Daily Caller, and so many more. He is a best-selling author of God and Donald Trump, along with some other books, which I'm sure we'll get to. And we're just delighted to have you on the show, Stephen. So thanks so much for being here.
Well, it's a privilege to be with you guys.
Yes, thank you.
So I have to ask you, back in 1975, you're a 24-year-old reporter. You get this idea that you want to start a media organization, and you do. But I know I'm leaving out a ton of details. So I'd love if you can maybe just start us off by telling us about why or how you started Charisma Media, this like gargantuan.
Well, back in that day, for anyone who knows anything about history, the Jesus movement was still going full blast, and the Charismatic movement was causing a lot of people in mainline churches to be, you know, excited about the Holy Spirit and miracles and healings and all those kind of things. And I was a gung-ho young Christian and involved in ministry at my church on a volunteer basis. I was also a journalist, as you said. I was a newspaper journalist. Newspapers were big back then. And, you know, this was
What's a newspaper, Stephen?
Well, they're still around.
I know.
There's one called the New York Times. We have one in our city called the Orlando Sentinel, which is who I worked for. But it was before the days of the personal computer. I know you probably don't even know what a manual typewriter is, but that's how we typed our stories back then. And I don't know. I digress. You know, I was a young journalist. I wasn't making much money. I was trying to think of a way that I could freelance. And I thought, well, maybe I could publish a little magazine, because I love telling stories. I love focusing on things. And so it just started very, very small and had some success. And of course, I was willing to sacrifice back in those days. Most people who start something aren't willing to sacrifice. They don't have the wherewithal. The Lord opened doors, and it just gradually grew. So it was Charisma Magazine. That was 49 years ago.
Wow.
You guys weren't even born then, you know.
I was not.
So it morphed and grew. And of course, I had to learn leadership skills. I had to learn to have vision. I had to learn to be disciplined. I had to learn how to recruit and train people and share the vision and all those kinds of things. The Christian publishing industry was booming back then. It's still around, but it's really changed. Half the Christian publishing industry is now HarperCollins, which is owned by Rupert Murdoch, with names like Zondervan and Nelson. And back then, there were a lot of Christian bookstores. At least 2/3 of them have gone out of business. And now we sell through Amazon, which didn't exist back then. We sell through Walmart. Barnes and Noble, all those kind of places. And we have really become a book publisher. In fact, our number one author is Jonathan Cahn, and his book, The Dragon's Prophecy, which I do not have within arm reach, I don't think. It just came out last week. In fact, it came out a week from today. And and it was as high as number 3 of all books sold. We've never had we've done, this is our 9th Jonathan Cahn book, and we've never had one start this fast. He's most famous for The Harbinger. His first book sold 2 million copies, but it didn't start this big. And here's the book. And it's just a very, very important book. I'm probably best known for Charisma Magazine just because that's what I've done over the years. But we've done a lot of things. We were involved with Promise Keepers. We had a program on TBN at one point. We've had numerous magazines. We published in Spanish. And part of it is that I'm an entrepreneur, and we were trying to serve church and serve the readers. And there seemed to be an opening in the Spanish market, and we had some talented staff. We published in Spanish for 25 years.
That's amazing.
We later sold it. I'm a Christian publisher who also has something of a media presence, partly because I've just been out there. I got to know people. I've had the opportunity to interview presidents. In fact, on my own podcast, which is called The Strang Report, I put my interview with Donald Trump last week. I did the interview in 2016. Wow. I used it in some of my books. In other words, I've used the transcript, and quoted from it. What I didn't realize is that one of the staff who were with me, who was behind me, was recording it on his iPhone. And we found it. And it's not a real fancy interview. We were in a back room at a convention hall. I had negotiated a 10-minute interview with him. But it's kind of interesting to watch. He was very respectful. He gave me thoughtful answers. There was no glitz and glamour. But and then I interviewed Barack Obama when he was running. It was a group setting, but it was kind of like a small press conference in a way. And I was invited to the White House and interviewed George W. Bush with 5 other journalists in the Lincoln Room, or one of those famous rooms. I was too nervous about the interview to know where I was. And interviewed George H.W. Bush with a group of other people. So Donald Trump was really the only one I had a one-on-one with. But you know what? There are a lot of people that never even meet a president. And so I feel very honored. Yeah. And part of it is that I've just know people, and, it's really your friends who open those kind of doors. And I've had a lot of fun. I enjoy going to work every day. I've had very, very few people I've been doing what I've been doing now for 49 years. I know you're supposed to say you don't look that old, but I am.
You don't look that old.
Yeah, you don't look that old at all.
Well, it's the makeup, and the lighting.
I need your makeup artist. I feel like I look way older than I am.
Yeah, what's your skincare routine? I got to jot it down, Well, Steve, I'm curious, Steve, this media, I don't know if you want to call it an empire. I don't want to use that word in a way that's like a pejorative, but like you've got this media organization that's really successful. I'm curious if like the responsibility of this, of being over this organization weighs on you at all, because I mean, as a consumer of news from all kinds of sources, sometimes I do get dismayed because I'm like, why are they covering this? Why are they covering it this way? Why aren't they covering the other thing? And I'd be interested to hear from you, like what's kind of the thought process behind, how you kind of focus your energies, your resources, and what have you.
Well, that's a good question. If you call it an empire, it's got to be a lowercase e for sure.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's all relative, compared to Rupert Murdoch. We're like Singapore compared to Russia. Yes, Singapore is a successful little country, and they do some good things, and they found their way in a big world, and so have we. You would see us as a media company. A lot of media companies are owned by corporations. Ours is family owned.
Awesome.
We started very, very small. We have no debt, largely because back in the early days, nobody would loan me any money. I wasn't a good risk. So I had to learn how to get along without it, which is a lesson a lot of people don't know. So we're a family-owned company, and my responsibility is to try to live my life in a way that's pleasing to God, live in a way that my family is taken care of, if you can understand that. I'm not trying to win any awards from anyone. I have nothing to prove at this stage in life. Yes, I want to grow and I want to do more, but I have nothing to prove. I've gotten a lot of awards that I thought I would never get. Now, I've never earned a Pulitzer Prize, or
a Peabody.
But I'm not going to bore you with the awards. Most of them were so long ago. Even the thing that Time Magazine named me one of the most 25 influential evangelicals, it was in 2003. So that was, no, let's see. Yeah, it was in 2003. No, it was in 2005. See, I can't even remember the year. And George Bush was president, and he won re-election. And when he won re-election, the secular press in New York, almost no one of whom goes to church, they don't even know anyone who's born again.
Yeah.
And they said the election was really won by the evangelicals. So they did the typical thing. Who are these evangelicals? We don't know these people. They don't go to our clubs in Manhattan or wherever they hang out. And so they did a story on 25 evangelicals, and I was one of them. It was also T.D. Jakes and Joyce Meyer. And it was because we had published a book called The Faith of George W. Bush. And it had made the New York Times bestseller. And George W. Bush was very, very quiet about his faith. But he was born again. And we told the story. His family goes way back. And he had several great-grandfathers that were ministers. One named George Bush, who he was actually named after from the 1840s, who was one of the first Christian Zionists. If you go over to Jerusalem, you can go to the museum that tells the story of Christian Zionists, and they talk about George Bush. But I think that his dad was and he would have been like Uncle George or Great Uncle George. You know how names pass down through families.
Yes.
So anyway, there are a lot of evangelicals who didn't know much about George Bush. He was just an average Republican, but it was like, oh, he's one of us. And so Time Magazine said that it swayed the election. That's what they think is influential. Now, if I got a bunch of people saved, filled with the Holy Ghost, on fire for God, they wouldn't think that's influential at all. In my world, that's what's more important. Listen, I was shocked when that article came out. It has added to my bio. People like you read it. But, I would not be considered one of the 25 most influential now, because now everything's on social media. And yes, I'm on social media. And yes, it's a platform. But, Joseph Z. and Rustlin and Alan DiDio and some of these people have huge followings that I couldn't even dream of. Of course, part of my doing it is because I enjoy interviewing. I enjoy having a platform. But I also have a very good staff who could really I could delegate everything I do to other people. I just sort of enjoy doing it. I enjoy doing interviews like this. I don't do them real often, but, over the years I've done, all the shows. And because of my books on Trump, I was on CNN, MSNBC, Fox several times. My wife told me not to go on CNN. She said it was a den of vipers. That was her opinion. And I thought, what is the worst thing they can do to me? They can't make me lose advertisers. I won't lose any readers. The only thing is they can do is make me look stupid. And actually, I was able. It was when Stormy Daniels was in the news. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And they were looking for a evangelical leader that would badmouth Trump. Well, they didn't do their research very well, and they wanted to know, are born again Christians going to finally turn their back on Trump because he did this immoral act with a porn star? Well, Trump maintains that he never did anything with her. Now, there were a bunch of other people, it ended up at a couple divorces, and he was a well-known New York playboy. And you know what? The media loved him during that era. He was on the cover of every magazine possible. He went to all the parties, but then he got serious about life. I think he became concerned about the direction of our country. He settled down with Melania. None of the stuff that they accuse him of is in recent years. Unlike other presidents in the White House, I don't need to mention any names. You know what I'm saying? So they asked me if I approved of that. And I said, no, nobody who believes the Bible would approve of that. But I said, he says it's not true. And I believe that he's changed. And I said, anybody who's been forgiven by Christ has done something that they would not want on CNN. And they sort of understand that if Christ will forgive them, they'll forgive Donald Trump. Well, we thought that you had to ask for forgiveness. And I went on and said, well, that's between you and, him and the Lord. But I said, the whole essence of Christianity is forgiveness and a second chance and starting over. I was able to preach the gospel. And this lady who is Allison Camarado, she didn't know, she was very respectful, but she didn't know how to react to me. I mean, she barely knew what I was talking about. And so it turned into a great opportunity for me. And I didn't really expect the questioning to be that way, but and it was live TV, so they couldn't edit it. And
that's good.
Probably the interview was supposed to be about 6 minutes, and I think we went 10 or 11, which means that, they thought it was interesting. So anyway, I've just had a lot of interesting experiences, and, part of it is decisions that I made over the years. I made a decision to I don't have to ask somebody if I need to cover a story in other parts of the world. I've been to over 60 countries. I've been to all kinds of conferences. I've interviewed 3 or 4 heads of state outside the United States. I'd have to count on my fingers. And
that's amazing.
It was all connected with something else I was doing. And listen,
sure.
I mentor a lot of young men, and I encourage them, dream your dreams, decide what you want to do, and then figure out a way to do it. A lot of people, the poet said, live lives of quiet desperation. They don't go for it. Now, there's always a pendulum can swing too far the other way. And I've seen a lot of people in media who are egomaniacs. They're in it for themselves. They're jerks, and I'm sure there are people that say that about me sometimes, but, I try to walk humbly before the Lord. I'm just doing the best I can, putting one foot in front of the other, and there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, that's the way all of us should live. Too many people flame out, and sadly, too many Christians flame out. And one of my passions is to try to do what I can to encourage a younger generation to be strong for the Lord, because things are very difficult, not only politically, but they're just difficult in general. I mean, we could be facing a world war that would change everything if that happens. And that's one of the reasons I support Donald Trump, is because I believe on the world stage that he's respected. And while I have nothing personally against Kamala Harris, I mean, she can't even handle herself with a journalist answering questions. How is she going to hold up to President Xi or Putin, just to name 2 that everybody would know? But there's a lot of bad actors in the world. And,
totally.
We believe in some ways that the world is, as a Christian, I believe that the world is racing toward the end of time. But so did the Apostle Paul, who believed that Christ's return was soon. And we don't really know when.
We don't know what's going to happen.
But we have to be ready.
Really
and it certainly looks like things are culminating with one world government. We call them globalists. With we now have the technology that they could keep you from buying and selling. We saw that during COVID. Our rights we're losing our rights. And so I believe this election is very important.
I would love to talk to you a little bit about that in the sense of so you've written these books on Donald Trump, and I think that's awesome. Why did you feel like you needed to write a book on Donald Trump? What was the impetus behind it? What did you feel like was being misrepresented that needed to be corrected? Why essentially did you feel like you needed to support Donald Trump? Because I think he is a pretty controversial person. So
was Bill Clinton. So is Richard Nixon.
No doubt. And so is Obama.
We can go right down the line. They're all controversial. Every one of them. Jimmy Carter was controversial just because he was so weak and inept. Well, that's a good question. I think initially I was for Ted Cruz. I knew Donald Trump from the celebrity TV show, from just being in the news. I wasn't particularly impressed. But when it came down between him and Hillary Clinton, they talk about never Trumpers. I was a never Hillary voter, I used to say ABC, anybody but Clinton. And as I began to understand, first of all, I interviewed him. He was respectful to me. He could have been an arrogant politician. And so that impressed me. His policies impressed me. And I could overlook, he's a New Yorker. None of us like New Yorkers, They might be
New Yorkers
really nice
don't
people.
even like New Yorkers.
Well, actually, a New Yorker was explaining to me that they bond over griping about the weather or about the fact the bus is late or the governor or there's garbage that hasn't been picked up. That's how they actually make friends. We kind of laugh about it. And, every region of the country would have something that you could tease about. But getting back to Donald Trump, I began to hear Christian leaders say that they believe that God was raising him up. And as a Christian, I believe that God has a plan and purpose. Now, I know that with mainstream media, they don't even consider God at all. At all. They just don't. It's not on the radar screen. But there was a prophet named Kim Clement. He's since passed away. I knew him since the early 90s. And in 2007, he was prophesying that God was going to raise up a trumpet, and he was going to put a man in the White House that was not a praying man when he went in, but he'd be a praying man when he came out. And he was going to change the direction of America and this kind of thing. And this is documented on video. In fact, any of your viewers can go on YouTube, put in Donald Trump and Kim Clement, and I promise you, these videos, which have been viewed over 1 million times, will pop up. You can see it for yourself. Well, I believe in the prophetic. Sadly, there are some people who say they're prophets and their prophecies don't come true, or I don't know. Sometimes it's just maybe a lot of trivia. But I thought, is it possible that that this was prophesied? And we wrote about this. We had some of these people write about it in Charisma magazine. We devoted an entire issue of Charisma to the election. We said that these prophets had said that this unlikely man, that God was raising up an imperfect leader. And here's the rationale. There was a leader in Persia named Cyrus who was not a believer in Jehovah God, who God used to let the Israelites go back to Jerusalem. And so here's an example of how God used an imperfect leader. And if you believe the Bible, you know that God always used imperfect leaders. Look at Moses and Abraham, David with Bathsheba. We could go right down the line. So the thing that I've said when I've had similar conversations is I'm glad that God uses imperfect leaders, because that means he can use me and you. And so I was able to get over the fact that Donald Trump was not a Sunday school teacher kind of personality that just went around making everyone feel all warm and fuzzy. I recognized that we needed a strong leader. I had the opportunity to go to his victory party the night of the election. I knew someone who was invited who got me an invitation. And I thought, if the prophets are right, this is going to be historic. I want to be there. So I was there. You all saw them come in at like 2:45 in the morning, walk across the stage. I was there on the front row. We were all standing, but I mean, I was there. They had ropes to kind of keep us back. I was right there. I saw it. So I mentioned The Faith of George W. Bush. We recognized that there was a book there, and we actually went out and recruited a writer named Stephen Mansfield. He did a great job. The book ended up being New York Times bestseller. And I have found there have been other books where we recognized that there was a need in the market, and we actually recruited an author. We did that recently with a book called The Trump Code, which actually comes out next week, which we can talk about if you're interested. But we recruited Troy Anderson. He used to be on my staff, and he did a great job with the book. And that book's taking off too. The reason I say this is that in this case, instead of recruiting somebody, I recruited myself. I just felt that the story hadn't been told. After the election, I read Newt Gingrich's book on the election, Doug Weed's book on the election, and some others, and they didn't even mention the Christian vote except in passing, let alone, and I felt that it needed to be put on the record. So the result was this book, God and Donald Trump. Now, you have to understand, I'm a newspaper writer by background. I'm a magazine guy. I've become a businessman. And writing a book like this was a real stretch for me. But I have a good staff. I have leadership where I was able to sneak off. And, it took me a couple of months to write it. And it was successful. It became a bestseller. And it spawned the other books. That's how things work in publishing. If you have a successful book, then there's a follow-up book, which was called The Trump Aftershock on his first 2 years in office. Then I wrote one called God, Trump, and the 2020 election, which was my impassioned plea why I believed that Trump needed to be elected and warning why he might lose. And some of the stuff I predicted actually happened. The book came out about 6 weeks before the COVID shutdown, but it actually sold fairly well. But it didn't help swing the election, that's for sure. So I did not do a book like this time, but I'm just explaining to you why I wrote the books. And also, for me, it was a stretch. Isn't it good that we do things in our lives that makes a stretch? I mean, you guys weren't broadcasters at one point, yet now you're YouTubers and podcasters, and you're having to grow and develop and get people to like you and to follow you and to subscribe and do all those good things. And so this is my story. Long answer to a short question.
Love it. I love it. And I really appreciate you kind of giving us a piece of your heart about, your passion for journalism and kind of having creative control over what your media organization does. I mean, like we're not a very big podcast. I mean, not anywhere close to the Joe Rogan side of things. But
nobody is.
Yeah, nobody is.
That's like saying nobody plays golf like Tiger Woods.
It's true. And it's one of those. I mean, while some might consider us as part of the media, I mean, we're just podcasters, YouTubers, but we like having creative control over our program because we really feel it's important to, have diverse sides of an idea, an argument, whatever. But, as we always say, we're united in faith. We may be separated by politics, but we're united by faith. And we just think that should be the sort of central, thing that unifies all of us. Find some common ground, unite, and then you can talk about those difficult issues, kind of with because we love each other, we love other humans. We love diversity. We love all this other kind of stuff. Anyways, I am curious though about how do you kind of walk that fine line, if it is a fine line, of having support for somebody, whether it's Trump, whether it's, Harris, whether it's Obama or Bush, doesn't matter, but you supporting somebody as a person of faith, and having, folks that are not believers, try to attribute like a broad range of different things to you and your faith because you're supporting, X candidate. If hopefully that wasn't too confusing of a question, but in essence, we see this a lot with Trump. We saw this a lot with Obama. Christians supporting Obama, evangelical supporting Harris, evangelical supporting Trump, and then you get a whole bunch of non-believers that are like, really, like that's what your faith is all about. Like it doesn't seem like the kind of faith that I would want to be a part of. So like, how do you balance or reconcile those two things?
Well, at the risk of being rude, I just think that's a lot of nonsense. It's that people throw out there. If there isn't something major to criticize, people are going to criticize something minor, and you can't live your life based on that, because if it's not this, it's going to be something else. The thing is that Trump is a great leader. He just is. Yes, he started off from a successful family, and yes, his father gave him $1 million, but he's turned it into several billion. He rose to become president. We didn't get into new wars. He was able to turn a lot of things around. And, the thing is, a lot of people don't like his personality, and he won't back down from the bullies. Most of the Republicans, I don't care if it's John McCain or George W. Bush or senators or whatever, if they're hit by the left, I'm going to call them, because I don't really even consider this as Democrat or Republican. In fact, 100 years ago, the Democrats were the party of the Christians of the day. William Jennings Bryan ran for president. He didn't win, but he was a well-known, very strong Christian back in the teens when he ran, a little more than 100 years ago. And, with Trump, they just don't like his personality, because he'll bark at some journalist who asked him some asinine question. And really, all the leaders are flawed. Biden, we're not here to bash Biden. And, my heart goes out to him with the things he's dealing with his own decline. But there is reason to believe that the Biden family takes bribes. Nobody's looked into it. And what happened with Hunter Biden, I realize that's his son, it's not Biden. But there's a lot to criticize. And his policies, some of his policies, you can criticize. You can go right down the line and do that from everyone. And some people's job is to do nothing but tear down, especially when it's a political party. The Democratic Party has been taken over by the far left. And you have to realize, I was a Democrat. I grew up in the anti-Vietnam era. I could see the seeds of what we have today back in the 70s when I was in university, and later when I was a newspaper reporter. The media was lefty back then. It just wasn't extreme. And I did an article at the Orlando Sentinel about Catherine Kuhlman. I don't know if you remember her, but she was quite a famous healing evangelist, and she was in our area. And I did a journalistic article, but it was, I looked at the half glass full instead of the half glass empty, if you know what I mean. And my editors went along with it. It was about the service and her ministry and how she helped people, rather than how she was stealing money from people and getting rich herself and all that kind of stuff, which is usually how the media covers the Christian community. And part of it, we talk about alternative media now. With conservative media, because the mainstream media has gotten so left. I mean, so now we have Daily Wire, we have Tucker Carlson Network, we have Blaze, we've got Bill O'Reilly doing his own thing. But years ago, I was doing alternative media and reporting on the church, reporting on the Jesus movement, reporting on the men's movement. Now, it was not all favorable, but we looked at it, how would I say it? You know, if somebody came over from Pravda in Russia and wrote about the United States, they're going to write very differently than an American would write. They just will, because their perspective is so different. And so my coverage, and listen, I won the highest award in collegiate journalism. If you're outside those circles, you don't know about it. But I mean, I was successful as a young journalist and trained as a journalist, and it was good training because I saw that even back then, Christianity was, first of all, most of the journalists were not churchgoers. They just weren't. And, you know, that's their decision to make. But I guess my whole point in this small rant is that I could see the seeds of what we have in journalism today. And I was doing, in my small way, trying to be alternative media. And, you know, we've had an outside influence from our size. And I was not willing to sell out. I've had all kinds of opportunities to sell out over the years. I mean, sell the company. I realize sell out means something else. And to me, selling out, it would have been selling out. But that was not my vision. My vision was to serve God, and this was the platform that he gave me. And I've tried to be faithful. I believe in the parable of the talents. You know, I was not the guy with 5 talents, but, you know, I probably was a guy with 2 talents, and I was able to double it to 4. And Jesus said the same thing to all three. He said exactly the same words. Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in little. Now you'll be faithful in much. Enter into the joy of the Lord. And I have shared that as I've mentored young people who are trying to find their way in life. Just use be faithful in what you do. Yes. And we live in a great country. And if you have a dream, and if you set a goal and you work hard and you're honest, listen, there are so many opportunities. We need people like that. But most people, they're lazy. They want something for nothing. If they put in an effort, they do it for a short time. A lot of people fail because they don't stick around long enough to succeed.
Yeah, I totally hear that. I mean, I planted a church. You know, I definitely feel a bit of a kindred spirit with you, Stephen, because I started a church. Basically, everything in my income right now has been because I've started something. And it's not as successful as I want it to be. It's not a big church. It's a small church right now. And I've had to fundraise and I've had to do all of that. But we've survived 5 years. And I pray and hope that it can be 49 years that we're going. And I've done this. Why? Because I felt like it was something that I really wanted to do to make an impact in the world, right? Yeah. And just working hard. That's really difficult. And I gotta hats off to you for doing this and pursuing the dream, being persistent in it. I just think that's amazing. That's not my question, but I did want to say that. And, you know, so I have a complicated relationship with Donald Trump. I don't have any relationship with Donald Trump. I'm saying internally I do. And on the one hand, I consider myself a conservative Christian. I'm probably not I wouldn't be considered as conservative by people now in some areas. I still think I really am. But I think because of my views on Trump, I probably wouldn't be.
Well, look at Bill Maher. He is very, very liberal, has been for years.
Yes,
but he
and
says
now
he hasn't changed, and the Democratic Party's moved so far left that they consider him a conservative. Part of it is what we consider conservative and liberal is just relative to other things.
I completely
So what's
agree
your problem
with
with? Here, I'm asking you questions.
Oh, no worries.
What's your problem with Donald Trump then?
Well, here's what happened. So I voted for him in 2016 because I was like, I never really liked him from the beginning. I was kind of like what you were. I didn't think he had a lot of depth when I was looking at his policies and his like YouTube videos. And I remember he'd make some claims like when he was going to New Hampshire. I remember distinctly this. He was like, I'm going to get rid of all drugs in New Hampshire. He would just kind of make these claims. And I'm like, how is he going to do that? You know, but there was never any like, hey, here's how I'm going to do that. It was more, here's the statement I'm going to make. And then there's the blanket statement. Let's move on from that. Now, again, I really appreciated his presidency, to be honest with you. And I did it. I voted for him because I was very concerned with the way the country was going after the Obama years. And I did not like what I had seen happen on the Supreme Court. I felt like things like the legalization of same-sex marriage, the ways in which abortion had gained even more ground and all that. Now, it's amazing thinking about that now, right, with Roe v. Wade overturned and all that. And it shows you the power of the president to make changes in the court. And I think that, so if you're asking me what my concerns are, and then I would love for you, because my question was going to be for you, convince me. I didn't vote for him in 2020. I don't plan to vote for him in 2024 this year. I'm not voting Democrat. I've never voted Democrat. And I don't plan to vote Democrat. And maybe that's my own issue of like, I will never vote Democrat. And maybe I should like question myself about being that rigid. But I don't feel any inspiration from Kamala. Biden was basically weakened at Bernie's. I thought, they're keeping the dude just
and they
up
say
there.
That Kamala is left of Bernie. I'm not sure how you measure that.
I mean, yeah, I am not.
She has not been tested.
Not a fan of the far left, and I mean, I love Will.
But what is the worst thing that can happen with Trump? What's the worst thing that can happen? He'll stand up to Putin. He'll stand up to Xi. He'll close the border. I think the
worst thing that could happen, Stephen, if I'm being totally honest, is I think that he might. I don't trust his ego.
You don't trust
now again his ego. Now again, I don't know him. I've never met him.
I don't trust your ego. You may be an egomaniac, but I can still be your friend. I can still be on your podcast. But
I think that's I'm afraid that my concern is that he may put himself over the country. That's my concern. And I think that
you have no proof. And what is the alternative?
Well,
Kamala is the weakest candidate maybe to ever run for president in the history of the country. She got not one vote in the primary. The Democrats make this big thing about saving democracy. And
convince me to vote for Trump. That was going to be my question.
14 million votes, and there was a coup. Now, why was there a coup? Because they saw how weak he was after they had lied about his cognitive ability. The New York Times had an article yesterday that he has been on vacation 500 and some days during his presidency. I wasn't aware it was that much because I guess the media kind of covered up, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's a high pressure job, him taking vacation, but 500 and some days, it was like 40% of the days he's been in the White House. It's a mess. And it's like Argentina. In the 1920s, Argentina had the 7th largest economy in the world, if I remember correctly. And then they got the Perones. Remember them? Juan Perón. And what was his wife's name? I don't remember right now. They beat that country into the ground. I've been to Argentina several times. It's a beautiful country. There's a lot to compare it with the United States and the Southern Hemisphere. And it's horrible. They finally got in this new fellow that's a very conservative, and he's kind of getting things. They have like 1,500% inflation a year, horrible numbers that we can't even grapple with. And there's been some other countries where they finally put in a conservative And in this case, it's going to either be Kamala or it's going to be Trump, period. And I would take my chances. Listen, Patton was not a very nice man, but he was a great general, and that's what we needed. Winston Churchill was very unlikable, and he liked brandy a little too much. We can go right down through history. Pardon me?
He always had a brandy in his hand.
And a cigar.
That's kind of, yes.
And if you haven't seen that movie on Churchill, you need to see it. It's a wonderful movie. It makes you love him. And, you know, I believe that God raised him up at that time. It's not very well known, but he called for a day of prayer right before Dunkirk. And Dunkirk was a turning point in the war. You know, that's when the British soldiers were in northern France and Hitler had them surrounded and could have wiped them out. And they had a flotilla, big boats and little boats, and went across the English Channel and brought back 400,000 soldiers, not only saved their lives, but gave them an army. And it was probably due to prayer. Now, are the historians and the media going to acknowledge that? Probably not. We don't give God credit. But those kinds of things happen when people pray. And I'll give you a scoop about Donald Trump. I hope I don't get in trouble with this, and I know this is being recorded.
Convince me. I mean, I'm willing to be convinced.
Last night,
either way, trust me.
I was on a prayer call with Donald Trump. It was the Faith and Family Policy Council or something like that. Paula White Kane was the one that kind of put it together. Jensen Franklin, who's a friend of mine and one of my authors. Sam Rodriguez, who's one of my authors, was on there.
We had him on the show. Sam came on the show.
He's a great guy, and we've been friends.
He was awesome.
Since he was in his 20s. He's in his 50s now, so we've been friends a long time. And Donald Trump came on the call, and he said a few words. He was humble in his attitude, his soft-spoken, and different people. Paula White prayed for him. Jensen prayed for him. Really, they all prayed for him. The preacher, whose name I forget, he's the one that was at the Republican convention. He's from Detroit. He prayed, and Donald Trump came on the line. It was about a 30-minute call. It was off the record, so that's why I may get in trouble. I'm not doing an article about it. I'm just telling you it happened. And
it's all good.
Someone made a comment about he could go ahead and leave the line. There were two more to pray. He said, no, I'll stay on. And after each prayer, he thanked the person for them. And, you know, what does that say? At least it says that he is respectful of people who pray, and he seemed to appreciate it. And he seemed sincere. But if we can't take somebody's word that they're sincere about prayer, what can we do?
Yeah,
you know,
I agree.
That's like questioning mother's milk. You know, maybe it's bad for the baby. You know, I mean, there are just some things that you have to believe are good things. And I believe that prayer is good. I think Donald Trump loves America. He's sincere. He is not two-faced. And listen, these other politicians, Biden never earned more than a couple $100,000 a year, which is a nice salary, but it's not wealth. How is it that he is now worth millions of dollars? Same thing for some of the others with Obama. Obama and Michelle, you know, made a couple $100,000 a year when he went in office. They now own several multi-million-dollar homes. It's just interesting that these politicians, same thing with the Clintons, and Donald Trump's income and net worth has actually gone down. It's gone from $4 billion to $3 billion, if I remember the numbers correctly, or in that ballpark. It's because he loves America. He is concerned about the same things you and I are. We cannot be passive. This is World War II, and the situation is like Dunkirk, and we've got to turn Hitler back in a manner of speaking. I'm not calling anybody Hitler, except Hitler was just the enemy. And I believe that Donald Trump is a good man. I wish that he had more spiritual mentoring. One of the questions I asked, if anybody wants to go on my podcast, is called The Strang Report. It's my name, Strang Report. And they're on YouTube. and watch it. It was a 10-minute interview. You can. One of the questions I asked him was who he would get spiritual advice from, and he mentioned several people, including Franklin Graham and some other people. I know that he meets with people to pray. I heard him with my own ears last night, and there were thousands of people on the call. They didn't say how many, but they said there were, apparently they have these calls from time to time. I was vaguely aware that they happened, but I was curious about this one. And I just felt that I wanted to be on there, and I believe he's a good man. I know that he listens to input. He was raised a Presbyterian. I go into all that with my. Notice how I get a plug in.
Yeah, great. You're doing great.
That's really good.
Listen, when you're in publishing, you got to get people to buy your books. That's how I make a living. The easiest way is to get it on Amazon.com. But there's a section in there about his spiritual history. His mother was a very sincere Presbyterian. He was confirmed in the Presbyterian Church. His mother gave him a Bible, which he likes to show people. He actually took the oath of office on 2 Bibles. It was the Bible his mother gave him, and then a Bible from Abraham Lincoln. He had one on top of the other. And now, does he live a good Christian life? Well, most people who go to your church and go to my church don't live a real good Christian life. They're trying.
I agree.
But they do things on the side, that they have a secret life. Donald Trump divorced one wife to marry the next one. He was well known as a playboy. Well, how many other people in our culture are known to be playboys? But he's also fairly conservative. He doesn't smoke nor drink, and apparently never has. Part of it was, and I tell this in the book, is because his older brother died young as an alcoholic, and so he saw what alcohol did to a person. And I believe that it's better if people don't smoke and drink. It used to be that all Christians thought that, but times have changed.
Yeah, I noticed on yesterday he promoted Hulk Hogan's new beer. That he has, which as a beer connoisseur, I'm intrigued. I'll buy it if I see it in the store, just because I don't know. I just like trying different kinds of beer, and it said that sourced all American hops kind of thing. Which if you are a big beer connoisseur, that's a big touch point. Whether the hops is grown in Mabton, Washington, or overseas somewhere. But I have one question for you, Steve, and this will be our last question. And it gets on, it kind of stays in the same vein about Trump's faith somewhat, but more broadly about Christian voters. When Trump chose Mike Pence to be his running mate, I think a lot of people saw that as a good sign to a lot of evangelical Christians. Hey, great, Trump might be this person that we're all kind of holding our nose, because whatever, but he's got Mike Pence next to him, a man of faith, what have you, and Mike Pence came out and said he wasn't going to vote for Trump. So how do you think that may affect the evangelical vote, in this upcoming election, or should it matter? I
don't think it should matter. It will probably affect a few people. It's not going to affect the election. I've never interviewed Mike Pence. I did meet him once. But I think that he proved that he was part of the deep state. And that's what Trump is really against. It's not even the left. Either the Democrats or Republicans get voted in, but the deep state is there regardless. And there's something very strong. And I'm talking about the FBI, the CIA, all those 3-letter agencies, all their regulations. One of the things that Trump did was he made it easier for business. My accounting department tells me from time to time we get these crazy surveys wanting to know how many employees we have and how many we laid off or fired, and did they get unemployment? And it's kind of like, why? it takes hours to fill them out and send them in. And there's penalties if you don't send it in on time. You know what I'm saying? And that is the tip of the iceberg. When people have to build a company or build a building and there's all these regulations, you know, some of them, all the regulations probably started off good, but they've gotten crazy. Trump ended a lot of them. A lot of the cost of of building a house nowadays is just the regulations before you ever buy a piece of concrete or a piece of wood to construct the house. Trump helped with that. I just think that I think he's a strong leader. We need a strong leader like Winston Churchill or even like Roosevelt. I don't agree with a lot of what Roosevelt did. And his lifestyle wasn't good either. He was with his mistress when he died. You know, I mean, it's sort of known. Nobody really remembers him for that. And I've studied his life. I've studied the life of several of the presidents. I'm interested in that kind of thing. So I don't know. I'm disappointed in Mike Pence. And yes, you're right. And in my book, I say that he sent a message to the evangelical community. And Mike Pence is a very sincere man of faith. I have no doubt that he's a man of faith. But just because somebody agrees with me theologically doesn't mean we're going to agree on everything politically any more than you guys do.
Absolutely.
And I think that Mike Pence lost all credibility. I think most Christians feel like I do. They know that the times are difficult and we need a strong leader, and the alternative is not just bad, it's horrible. It's horrible. In some ways, I think Biden would have been better than Kamala. You know, at least he got elected. But with his cognitive decline, which we all saw, and my mother recently passed away and she had dementia. And so I went through that with her.
Sorry to hear that.
And, you know, it's just sad. It's part of life. And my mother was a godly woman. It's not like she did something wrong and God punished her with dementia. I mean, it's just, in fact, all of us will be like that if we live long enough. I mean, we may need to live to 110, but we're going to fall down going up the stairs. I'm sorry. I mean, that's just part of getting old. And like I said earlier, my heart goes out to Biden. You know, he served the country for many, many years, and he wanted to be president. He made his goal. I don't think he's going to go down in history as a very good president. And he has become the puppet, in my opinion, of the far left. He was actually a fairly reasonable Democrat, but he just does anything, the Green New Deal, open borders. Open borders is horrible, horrible. And there's all kinds of sleeper cells that may show themselves. We had sleeper cells before 9/11. Hello? There were people practicing to fly airplanes. We didn't know about them. And I think that there's some sleeper cells from China or other places that are here, let alone all the other problems. Plus, why in the world are we having to pay to put them in hotels? You know, nice hotels. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm getting on a rant, but the problems are just so bad. In my opinion, there's no alternative than to take our chances with Donald Trump. And I'm impressed that he got J.D. Vance. If you haven't read J.D.'s book, Hillbilly Elegy, it's a great book. I recently read it and watched the movie. He has a very interesting background. He's a very strong leader. He's a very good conservative. And I believe that he will continue the MAGA movement because Trump's getting up there in years too, you know?
Totally.
And I think that he'll continue the MAGA movement. We certainly, listen, the Republicans and the Democrats, as far as I'm concerned, are like Coke and Pepsi. There may be some difference, but they're so similar, except on a handful of issues, you can't tell the difference. Well, that's my opinion, and I'll stick by it.
I appreciate that, Stephen. And you know what? I appreciate you coming on and spending some time with us. Thank you for giving us some of your time. I know it's super valuable. Don't take that lightly. And just really, really appreciate everything that you're doing with Charisma. Thank you for doing that, for having this alternative viewpoint, this Christian viewpoint that people can go to, publishing these books that people can read and have a perspective that I think is important and needed in our culture. How can people pick up the book, and how can they follow you?
Well, this is my latest book.
Practical.
I wrote several books on Trump, and this one is on the Holy Spirit. And Charisma is all about the Holy Spirit. And this is a lot of my own story, my own spiritual odyssey is in this book. It's called Spirit-Led Living in an Upside Down World. And the upside down world is all the stuff we've been talking about. And I'm saying that we have to be led by the Spirit. The Holy Spirit has to empower us no matter what. And they can get this on Amazon as well. And I hope people will tune into my Strang Report podcast. I've been doing podcasts since 2015. And I'm, trying to grow my own channel, but I'll encourage people to subscribe to your channel. If you'll send me the link, I'll put it on my own social media. People who follow me will be interested in this interview because I don't interview myself. If anything, I try to keep my own comments brief when I do interviews.
We wouldn't judge you if you did. Just so you know.
Well, it's been a fascinating conversation. I could keep talking with you for hours, but I really appreciate you coming on the show. Thanks so much, Stephen.
Yeah, thank you
for being here.
And thank you for the model that you are. We need to have models of people working together, and we haven't really talked about this, but one of the things that I've done in my career is try to encourage people to live godly lives, but also to build bridges of racial reconciliation. Going back to the 80s.
That's awesome.
And, in the Pentecostal and Charismatic community, the Black community is a pretty large percentage. Church of God in Christ, etc. T.D. Jakes, of course, is a huge ministry. And we've been proactive in Charisma to cover. I don't believe in DEI. I don't, but I believe that we can be intentional, and I've been intentional to build bridges, to recruit Black employees. We have a number of Black authors. They're qualified. We don't do it just because they're not qualified. But also I could live in my little mostly white world talking to my friends, most of whom are white. And I just say that from my own experience that I admire what you're doing because you're reaching across and you're a role model probably more than you know. And you encourage other people to do the same.
Thanks so much, Stephen. Those words really do mean a lot. I really appreciate it. And to our viewers and our watchers, thank you for joining us. This has been Stephen E. Strang. We're going to put links to his podcast and his books and to Charisma Magazine and their media organization on the show notes. So we really want you guys to check it out, buy the book, read it, give great 5-star reviews so it can get out there and people can see it. And until next time, guys, keep your conversations not right or left, but up. We'll see you then. Take care. Hey there, Josh Burtram here, faithful host of the Faithful Politics Podcast. I want to let you know about a compelling new spinoff, the Faith Roundtable, where I'll be interviewing top faith leaders, theologians, and scholars to unpack the pressing issues that are shaping the church in America today. We'll dive into topics like faith in public life, social justice, and how we can engage our communities more effectively. Make sure you don't miss any of our enlightening conversations by subscribing to it on our YouTube channel. Join me at the Faith Roundtable, where deep discussion meets thoughtful insight.